Okay, welcome to another installment of Philip K. Dick Talks. Today we have a very special guest, Charles de Lauzirika, who is uh, the producer, the final restoration producer of the final cut of Blade Runner. Charles is an award-winning documentarian, filmmaker, and DVD Blu-ray producer. He has worked extensively with Ridley Scott and other directors. He's the final cut restoration producer of Blade Runner and has been in charge of restorations and cuts for other films including Alien 3 and other film classics. Charles directed the documentary Dangerous Ways, Making Blade Runner. He has won 4 Saturn Awards, which are the most prestigious awards given for science fiction. One for Blade Runner, Twin Peaks, and the Alien Anthology, and Twin Peaks: The Entire Mystery, the best Blu-ray television release. Uh, Charles made his feature directorial debut with the psychological thriller Crave. This starring Edward Furlong, Ron Perlman, and he also one of the film's producers and co-wrote the screenplay with Robert Lawton. Um, in addition, he's also attached to direct and co-write a feature adaptation of the Philip K. Dick science fiction short, I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon. Through 2018 and 2019, Charles produced behind-the-scenes content for the DC Universe, Doom Patrol, and Stargirl, as well as a 71-minute documentary on the making of the Hellboy reboot, directed by Neil Marshall. Most recently, he also directed the short story film entitled Love Bite, which world premiere at the famous Sitges Film Festival in 2019 and recently screened at the Philip K. Dick Film Festival in New York City, where it won Best Horror Short. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. An excellent reading of my Wikipedia.
Yes, I was hoping we'd make sure. And sometimes I'm a little bit nervous because sometimes there are certain things that are missing or not there. So I hope we cover your background fairly accurately.
One thing is it's called Dangerous Days, not Dangerous.
It's Dangerous Days. Okay, great. Well, that's
okay.
All right, excellent.
Yeah, all pretty good.
So I guess for our people who are more Philip K. Dick fans, I guess you're more known for the Final Cut restoration producer. So, and I'm sure there are a lot of us right now watching that are not familiar with the various cuts. I believe there are 7 cuts as to the last count or so. So,
5 primary cuts. So.
5, great. So if you can please indulge us and walk us through the rationale for the various cuts that have been undertaken.
Well, let's see. The first cut technically is the work print, which is what they screened. They did test screenings, like market research screenings, to get people's opinions on the film. So that's the work print, which is, strangely enough, kind of the most different of all of them because it has a lot of temp music, some of which is from Jerry Goldsmith's score of Planet of the Apes and James Horner's score of Humanoids from the Deep, and I think The Hand is in there as well. So it's kind of a little bit of Vangelis. There's a lot of Vangelis, but a little bit of other movies' music in there as well, and then some different shots and different cuts of things, and an alternate voiceover at the end, but no voiceover for the rest of it. So that's the work print. That was kind of lost for a long time. And then in the theatrical release, which followed that, the original United States theatrical release, is kind of what most people saw. It had the voiceover, it had the happy ending, which was largely outtakes from The Shining. And then there was the home video version, which is the international version, which was basically the US theatrical cut, but with a little bit of extra violence in it. Batty gouging out Tyrell's eyes and Pris being killed was more violent. So that's 3 versions, right? Then, because of the work print, a director's cut came out, quote unquote director's cut, which basically what happened was there was a 70 millimeter film festival in LA, and they requested a print of Blade Runner, and the 70 print that they got was actually the work print. So, the audience there was completely blown away because right from the very first frame, from the Lad Company logo, it's different. The original, most cuts of the film have a black Lad Company logo. This one had a white one. So, so the word spread out around town. Oh my God, there's this lost cut of Blade Runner. Let's try to find it. And Warner Brothers, they released it in limited fashion in there was the New Art Theater in LA and the Castro Theater in San Francisco and probably some other places. That's kind of what got the ball rolling on a director's cut. So, because Ridley was not happy with the work print. So the idea was remove the voiceover, remove the happy ending, and add this unicorn dream, this vision that Deckard has. But at the time, Ridley was busy on other films and was not able to supervise this directly. So with his guidance and notes, they just made those three changes: no voiceover, no happy ending, and add the unicorn. But the unicorn could not be found in its original cut, so they used an outtake of it. So the director's cut that came out was kind of a stopgap. It wasn't really the full, true, quote-unquote director's cut. So, but that's what people learned, kind of what that sort of intended version was supposed to be. So then many years later, the opportunity came up to create the final cut, which was going to be the final word, the last say, the absolute ultimate polish on the film. So that was actually a huge undertaking. It took some years to get done. And not only did it involve those three things I told you about for the director's cut, but we found the original unicorn vision. So that went in. Ridley wanted to make some tweaks to some errors, some continuity issues, some visual effects roughness. He just wanted to go in and just really give it a nice polish. So myself and a team of amazing people at Warner Brothers and other visual effects studios supervised this new final cut, the final cut, like the definitive cut, and made several. There's probably over 100 picture changes in the final cut that people don't even notice because they're so seamless. And that was the whole point, was to keep you immersed in the film. So, for instance, the scene where Zora is shot and killed and runs through the glass in slow motion, for years and years, for 25 years, that was famously a very difficult scene to watch, not only because it was Zora being killed, but because it was an obvious stunt double. And the stunt double, whose name is Lee Pulford, she had a kind of a inappropriate wig. It didn't match Joanna Cassidy's hair, and it was shot in slow motion. It was shot with a long lens. It was very languid, and you could scrutinize every frame of it. So that always took people out of the movie because it was almost laughable. I was a kid. I think I was 15 when I saw Blade Runner opening day, and the audience laughed because they were immersed in this dark, emotional, serious film, and then this jumped in.
Right.
So it was unfortunate. So we fixed that. Joanna Cassidy came back, 25 years after the fact, and perfectly, kind of relived the role of Zora, and the effects team put her into the film. So those are basically the 5 cuts. I hope I explained that without confusing people. But
no, you did. I think it definitely clears up some of the air, because my understanding is that Ridley really, even though they called the 1992 cut the director's cut, is really not, because he was not really thoroughly pleased with that version.
It was a first attempt. It was a good start. It was just to get the 3 big things done, which they did. But there was just a whole host of other issues that Ridley hadn't been able to attack in the years prior, because he never really had true final control over the film, because he didn't own the film, and Warner Brothers didn't own the film. It was owned by the Blade Runner Partnership, which was Bud Yorkin and Jerry Perenchio. They owned the film, and so they had to approve everything, and they were not in the approving business for many years. But then, in the end, for the final cut, they agreed, and everyone agreed, and it was this perfect storm of everyone just coming together and making it work. So that was really nice. I'm glad that it ended well after years of not.
Sure.
a fun experience.
And it's a great, and I really suggest to anyone who's watching it to really watch. It's really, I believe, it's the best cut from all the one I've seen. How do they charge you with, because it's a major responsibility here to be final cut restoration producer. How did you come to be charged for this work, and how many times did you see Blade Runner before even coming and seeing and working on this project?
Well, I mean, I started interning for Ridley and Tony Scott's company, Scott Free, in 1994, coming out of film school, and that was 13 years before the Blade Runner, the final delivery of the final cut. So
Right.
over the course of that time, I had done a lot of odd jobs for Ridley and Tony's company, and that kind of, it started with me being an intern and then a script reader and then doing like story notes and things in development with them and a couple other little odd jobs along the way. But at some point, because I was like the big DVD geek in that office, and Fox was getting ready to work on the first Alien DVD box set, I just basically, told them you should be involved because DVD is an exciting new format. There's a lot of things you can do with it. The picture and sound is going to be much improved. You can add all of these supplemental extra features. So why not get involved? And he did. And he was leaving to go shoot Gladiator. So he asked if I would, supervise while he was gone. And that began many, many years and many, many projects, which ultimately for me, the crown jewel was Blade Runner, because it was my favorite film. And I really, was dying to get the ultimate version out there, not just the movie with the best picture and sound quality possible, but also all the behind the scenes content we could get out there. And like I said, it took years. I mean, there were multiple attempts to get it going, but again, it was like that was kind of what, for me, the whole DVD behind the scenes director's cut job that I did. That was the graduation. I was like, that's what the goal was all that time. So I'm glad it turned out, I think, reasonably well.
So for the term final cut restoration producer, can you just walk us through the specifics of what you are working with? I mean, clearly remastering is part of it, but what is the step-by-step work involved?
Well, one thing you have to keep in mind is that not only was I working with Warner Brothers and the various visual effects people and editing people and just all the teams,
Right.
I was doing that simultaneous with that. I was producing and directing all of Dangerous Days, the making of documentary, and
Right.
deleted scenes and all the behind the scenes content. And I was also working on Twin Peaks at the time. Working on the gold box set. So all that was happening at the same time. So somehow, but honestly, it's because I had two really great people working with me. Paul Prischman, who is no longer with us, but he was my associate producer on Blade Runner, and Amy Lowe Starbin, we worked with me on Twin Peaks. And there was a bit of crossover. Sometimes Amy would work a little bit on Blade Runner and Paul would work on Twin Peaks. So between the three of us, we were working on three fronts at the same time. But in terms of the restoration part of it, basically it was first establishing what is this new cut going to be, with all the different versions and all the potentially lost footage that we finally got access to. We finally got to go in and go through the negative and all the lost footage that was in boxes for years and years and years, just to kind of just do a deep dive and ascertain what this cut was going to be, and then get Ridley's approval. So once Ridley would sign off on things along the way, then we would go to work again with visual effects, with editorial, with sound, to make those things real and lock it in. The biggest, probably most complicated part of that process was visual effects, because there were several shots that we were going to go in and improve, and again, kind of remove the roughness and remove the errors and remove the technical quirks of the film that took you out of the story. We didn't want to start adding a lot of new crazy stuff just because we had the opportunity to. The methodology kind of was, does it take you out of the film? Does it take you out of the story? Does it take you out of the emotional moment? If yes, then we're going to go try to fix it and make it better, so you stay in the movie. And there were maybe 6 or 7 of those big moments where we thought, okay, we have to kind of help the movie out. If it was a flaw, which we called beloved flaws, if it was a flaw but it didn't take you out of the story, we tended to let it slide. Now, there were plenty of little bits of minutia and really, tiny pixel scrubbing of shots. But again, it was kind of like done along the way and not in such a way that anyone would notice. It was more of a perfectionism pass that, again, was for Ridley, and also just because we were all working on it so intensely for so long that we just wanted to clean up stuff that people either wouldn't notice, or it was so bad that we fixed it and that people wouldn't notice it because they assumed it was always right. It always looked right. And only the really serious Blade Runner fans would even notice that, oh, they changed that. But again, it wasn't to stand out. It wasn't to say, here's some crazy new effect shot. It was to say, this is how it really should have been in the beginning if there just hadn't been problems during production.
How was it working with Ridley? Did he micromanage the editing process, or he was just basically looking at certain pieces, and what's his style, and how did it also feel like working with him? I mean, is he I guess he's a perfectionist, but how, personality wise?
I mean, I worked with him on several projects over about 20 years. So it basically, I think he likes to get people in place to do their job and then let them do it, because, I think he would rather be doing other things than coming out and approving the umpteenth cut of Blade Runner, so he would, anything that was important, anything that I thought that he had to sign off on, we would take to him before we would proceed. And once he approved it, we'd move on. If it was little things, I would just wait till the next big juncture and say, okay, now look at this scene with this music, or look at this, effects pass or whatever. And he would just approve things along the way. And then towards the end, when it came down to the color timing, he spent a lot of time doing that. He was very hands-on there with the grading. And then the sound mix, he spent a lot of time with that. So basically the collection of elements, the creation of elements, he was just sort of like from afar approving and giving us comments and notes and how he would do it. But then when it came to bringing all these elements together for the final product, he was there for all of it. And he signed off on everything, and he made sure that it was what he wanted. And he made a lot of changes at the last minute too that threw us for a loop occasionally. But that was fun because it was always a new challenge, and it was always like, what's going to be the surprise today? And when you were getting towards the end of it, that's when it got exciting, because you could see he was excited because the film was actually coming together in this slightly new form that was well polished and well put together and state of the art. So the film had never looked or sounded better at that point.
Now, you mentioned that you worked with in Dangerous Days, which is one of the original titles, right, of Blade Runner that was thrown around before they chose your Blade Runner. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, there are a few titles, but I like Dangerous Days for the documentary because it kind of summed up the difficulty in making the film and like how intense it was and dark it was for a lot of people back in 81, 82, making it.
Right. For a lot of the cast, I've read that it's many of them they felt it was a very challenging period. It was long hours and very difficult shooting conditions. Now, is there any specific? I noticed like on the final cut versus the theatrical cut, that the final cut has more of a steely green at the very end, certain steely green scenes that were opted. Was there any stylistic reason why Ridley opted for more of that than staying with a more bluish kind of?
Well, it's basically partially, yes, it's a little more teal, a little more, I would say green, but kind of a blue green.
Right.
But a lot of that has to do with how your monitors and are calibrated. So, like for instance, when I see it perfectly calibrated, it's not as green as when I see people online posting screen caps and complaining about it being too green. So I'm kind of caught in the middle there thinking, well, I've seen a version of the film professionally projected that looks nowhere near what I'm seeing online, where people are, talking about what they think they're seeing. So I do think there's a bit of a, I don't know, a gray area, to use the wrong term, but that people are watching the film and that maybe is not exactly accurate. However, I will say that yes, it went a little greener, a little tealer than what was previously done in the film, and I think that was just because, again, you have to understand this was the first time Ridley really had the chance to go in and make the film look the way he wanted it to look.
Right.
That's how he wanted it to look. So, it's a bit more modern in terms of color style, I think, with films. And perhaps that was a way of maybe updating the film a little bit and making it look a little more new, I guess. But again, it's like if he knew that back then and had the control of it back then, he probably would have done it. So, and it's just what he wanted. The whole point was let him deliver the final version of the film that he wants to deliver, because he never had that opportunity. And because in the box set, we were putting in 4 other versions of the film in their original, coloring.
Right.
So if you didn't like the final cut's color, then you're more than welcome to watch any of the other versions that have the original color. So that was kind of like the point of giving everybody what they wanted. You just have to understand the final cut was his preferred. That look was his preferred look for the final cut, and he didn't go back and change the look for any of the previous versions.
Now the unicorn scene, which is it was not, I believe it was not in the theatrical cut, right? But it was shot though, right? Now, how in terms of relating to Harrison Ford, because my understanding was that Harrison really felt that and acted as if Deckard was human, whereas from what I've read, they agreed that Deckard is a human, but then later there was a change and there was a disagreement, and now the introduction of the unicorn was to suggest that yes, there's a possibility that he actually might be a replicant. So how was this reconciled in the beginning? I mean, was there an understanding that yes, we might want to introduce the possibility of Deckard being a replicant, or was that deliberately removed? Oh, did Ridley all along wanted to have that ambiguity, and when he finally had a chance, he inserted that scene?
Well, look, I think Ridley always felt that Deckard was a replicant, and he shot quite a bit of, I'll call them clues, as to Deckard's true origin or his true identity as a replicant, even though the film, any version of the film, never underlines it and says,
right,
here's Deckard's void comp test. He's absolutely 100% a replicant. That never happens. But there's obviously, depending on which version you watch, there's more and more obvious clues that he might be a replicant. So, I know Harrison Ford disagreed with that approach of, Deckard being a replicant. Hampton Fancher disagreed with it. I think, a lot of people disagree with it, but Ridley thought, well, let's try it, see how it works. So if you look at the deleted scenes from Blade Runner in the box set, I mean, some of them are obvious clues, Rachel telling Deckard that you and I were made for each other, or Gaff on the rooftop saying, you've done a man's job, sir, but are you sure you are a man? Right. Hard to tell who's who around here. It's like that type of stuff was obviously there to underline the idea that Deckard might be a replicant. But obviously a lot of people back then, in terms of like the Blade Runner partnership and other people who might have had an opinion, didn't feel like that was tracking or didn't make sense or whatever. So it didn't quite make it into the film, even though a couple of the clues are still in there, like Deckard's eyes glowing, which you could argue might be an accident because Rachel's eyes had to be glowing because she is a replicant. But again, just there were always different levels of hints and clues that became more and more clear with each new cut, for the most part. But and the unicorn scene was shot for Blade Runner. I mean, I've seen all the dailies of the unicorn scene, all the slates say Blade Runner on them. But people also think that maybe Ridley was kind of thinking about Legend, which was the film after that for him, and that this was a bit of a test for that, which I totally accept. That like that's probably what was in his mind, but it also conveniently and fortunately fit in with Deckard as a replicant. So, and that being the clue that connects to Gaff's origami of the unicorn at the end of the film. So again, these are all theories that have been discussed for for over 3 decades about Deckard and possibly being a replicant. That Hampton Fancher said it best. He said, "It's the question that's interesting. The answer is stupid." And And I totally agree with that. It's like the imagination that gets engaged when you try to think about, is he, isn't he, how did it work, how would it work, who is behind it, that keeps that whole thing alive. It keeps the storytelling alive off screen versus just having the answer and then you're done. You don't need to think about it anymore. So the fact that it's almost like a disease inside of you that's just, germinating and just kind of like will not stop, is what kind of helps keep Blade Runner alive, I think.
It has almost a viral aspect, especially now with the new, for the 2049. Well, if he's a replicant, well, he's like lives as long as humans, which is replicants are, many of them are supposed to live shorter lives or designed to.
But if you follow the theatrical cut's ending where Deckard says that Rachel was special, she had no termination date, we could also assume Deckard was special and he had no termination date. So therefore, since they're biological, creations,
right,
they would live until they died a normal life. You would think. So
sure, yeah.
I think it's all solid. It's almost like if you want to tear down any of this, you can. If you want to support it up, you can. It just depends on what you want to get out of the film, and everybody seems to have a different take on Blade Runner. Even the people who agree with each other on like 90% of other things will probably fight to the death on 10% of the rest. So that's what I think is the charm of this film, and why it keeps going and going, is because it's a puzzle that you just love to play with, and you try to figure it out, and you hand the puzzle to someone else, and they'll find a different way to, solve it. So it's that's one of the charms of it, I think.
So tell us a little bit about again, you mentioned earlier the Zora scene, which is running. Was Joanna Cassidy brought back to do any kind of work in 2000 during the final cut, or prior to that?
Yeah, she came back. On disc 5 of the box set, there's a piece called All Our Variant Futures, which is basically takes you through all the different cuts and what we did on the final cut, including behind the scenes footage of Joanna coming back. And we actually show an outtake of my interview with her from Dangerous Days, where he and I are having a conversation, has nothing to do with our interview, but we're talking about, we should go in and have reshoot it. And Joanna's like, let's reshoot it. Let's definitely reshoot it. And literally after that day at Joanna's house, I called up Kurt Galveo at Warner Brothers and I said, maybe we should really try to make this happen because Joanna wants to do it. And so then some days later, sure enough, we were on a stage down in Marina Del Rey, and she was back, and they were putting on the Zora tattoo on her neck, and they had a really great wig this time, and she looked amazing. Then it was just fascinating to see the visual effects team, how they shot her in front of a green screen. She even brought back the bra top, right, like the kind of looking gear that she had. And but she was sitting in a chair, kind of like what I am right now, and she would just kind of move in the chair and move her head around, and they would film that, and then they would later take the head and digitally basically cut and paste it into the movie. It was far more sophisticated and much more talent required than what I'm making it sound like, but it was a big deal, for them to do. And we all agreed that if it didn't look completely convincing, we would pull out. We wouldn't use it. And thankfully, it looked very convincing. It looked super convincing, especially back in 2007. It was almost a miracle that what we saw on the screen.
Yeah. Now, you, in one of your tweets, one of your accomplishments you claimed is that making Harrison Ford laugh. Is he a very serious guy who's always very intense and doesn't, or?
I don't know. I literally dealt with him for an hour on the day of the interview.
Okay.
But he was incredibly personable and charming and in a really great mood. So it wasn't a big deal to get him to laugh. It was just that when you talk about Blade Runner, which is not perhaps the best memory for a lot of people who worked on it, and Harrison Ford famously, didn't think it was the most pleasant shoot. The fact that he even chuckled or laughed or smiled about anything Blade Runner related was like, oh, it's better than just being like this sort of interrogation, about this film that was a pain in the ass back in the day.
Now, there's certain differences. So one of our programmers noticed between theatrical and the final cut. And at least when I watched the final cut, at the scene where Roy Batty is about to first talk, well, he meets
Leon?
Tyrell. It says father, whereas in the theatrical theatrical, it's more like fucker. So, is there a specific reason why the ambiguity, or actually, it doesn't even say fucker. It's almost, it sounds like he's saying that, but it's very.
He's saying it.
He actually says it. Okay, all right.
No, so the history basically is in the work print, in the original first shown public cut of the film, he said father. So in the work print, he says father. Then for the 3 versions after that, he says fucker.
Right.
And for the work print, we went back to father. There were a few times where in the final cut, we reverted back to the work print because that was the original intention. That's what Ridley wanted. And, for quite a long time, the final cut had fucker in it. And it was like one of the last few changes that Ridley wanted to make. We went to father. And I think he probably thought it was more poetic and less vulgar. I prefer fucker because it's like it just shows Batty's, the intensity of the situation he's in, the anger he's feeling.
Right.
And father is very poetic and kind of lofty. But it's fine because the film itself is, look, it's a big science fiction art film. So why not?
It's certainly a nice contrast to what happens to him afterwards when he basically, he kills him by just with the eyes, by pushing in his fingers on his eyes. So tell us a little bit now. Tell us a little bit about the work. You've actually worked with Ridley in other projects. You mentioned Legend, also Aliens 3. I read it was an assembly cut. Is that the correct term for what the work was?
Well, first of all, Ridley had nothing to do with that. That's not his film. That's David Fincher. He only directed the first Alien and then Prometheus and Covenant later on. But Alien 3 was another kind of dream project of mine just because I was fascinated with that film from the very first day I saw it on opening day because it seemed like such a disaster. It seemed like such a train wreck. And yet with enormous talent, obviously behind the lens, and the cast is phenomenal. So when you see that much talent and the final product is such a mess, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, how did it end up that way? And that's when I started thinking about the behind the scenes stories. And again, fortunately, just over the course of working on many DVD projects, I got a chance to produce the Alien quadrilogy box set, which was the original 4 Alien films and the documentaries that went with that, and the special edition versions of Alien, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection. The special edition of Aliens was done long before, so that was an amazing experience to kind of go in and find this lost cut of Alien 3 that had all of this completely different material in it, scenes that had never been seen before. The characters, these bald prison characters that so many people thought looked alike and they were hard to keep track of who's who, suddenly had some character in them, and it was easier to kind of connect with them. So that to me was definitely one of the most I think it's one of the most kind of like projects that I've been the most proud of. I would say over the years, for sure.
And did it take you as long as the final cut? Like I mentioned, the final cut was was a very lengthy process.
Yeah, no. We did 2 passes. So on the Alien movies, so Alien quadrilogy box set came out in 2003, and I think we spent about 14 or 16 months on that. So it's long, but it's not as long as Blade Runner for sure. And then in 2009, we came back and we did the Alien Anthology Blu-ray set, and we did additional work on the Alien 3 assembly cut, which you asked if that's the right name for it. That's what it's called on the set. I don't know if I would call it that exactly, because an assembly is not. An assembly is a completely different thing. An assembly is when you have just finished shooting and your editor has taken all the footage you've shot and just strung it out in chronological form for you to figure out, did we get everything? Are we missing something? Is there something we need to redo? It's a guide for the filmmaker. When people do interviews and they say, oh, there was a 4-hour cut of some movie, and I hear this a lot, that there's like this magical 4-hour cut of any movie. There might have been a 4-hour assembly of just all the scenes strung out, again, without any really finessed editing. But chances are there was not an actual 4-hour watchable cut of the film. So Alien 3, we first called it a special edition on the DVD set. That name somehow morphed into the assembly cut. It's not the most appropriate name for it, but it's fine because it is sort of like a really early version of the film that was probably even before they really test screened it. So, that's what it's called.
And now you also mentioned that you were working in the final cut. You're also doing work in Twin Peaks. Mm-hmm. Was that similar as well, or were you working on you had a different responsibility for that?
I produced all the like bonus features, all special feature content, like the newly produced stuff, and part of that was on the Gold Box. This was in 2007. The Gold Box had this piece called A Slice of Lynch, which was kind of a roundtable discussion with David Lynch, Kyle MacLachlan, Machen Amick, and John Wentworth. And we shot it in a bar in LA called the Bigfoot Lodge, which is very Twin Peaks looking. Looks like a cabin. So that was the first box set that I worked on with Twin Peaks, the Gold Box. It was a long form documentary called Secrets from Another Place. And then some other little bits and pieces in there as well. And then some years later, say 7 years later maybe, was the Blu-ray, the entire mystery. Right. So that had everything we had done before, but now a lot of it had been upgraded to high def. And in the case of Slice of Lynch, we doubled the length of it. We made it twice as long. And then we did a new piece that tied into Fire Walk With Me called Between Two Worlds, which was once again David Lynch doing a round table. This time it was with Ray Wise, Grace Zabriskie, and Cheryl Lee. And that was phenomenal because it began with David talking to them in character. So they were the Palmer family. And then we did a little break, and then they come back as their actor selves, and they start talking about what it was like to make Fire Walk With Me and the series itself. So yeah, so Twin Peaks was another dream project. It was my favorite show, and I really just was so lucky that I got to be a part of, a small part of it.
No, that must be juggling all these different projects at the same time. How did you do it? I mean, you're doing a documentary, working on Twin Peaks, Final Cut. I mean, was it like one day you're gonna do Blade Runner, another day Twin Peaks, or you do everything the same day, a little bit of each? How's your work style?
It was always different. Some days sometimes it was like one pure week of Blade Runner and one pure week of Twin Peaks. Sometimes it was 5 minutes of Twin Peaks and an hour of Blade Runner and back and forth. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It was just what had to get done. We had a delivery date. We had a whole list of objectives that we had to try to attack. And it was just, how do we get it done? And again, there's so many people involved that are very talented and hardworking and just, very loyal to the various titles that I've been lucky enough to produce that, you need a small army to do these things, especially simultaneously. I've gotten to the point now where it's sort of like it's much easier to just work with a few people because the scope of these projects have gotten a lot smaller because that's just the business,
Right.
But every once in a while I get a big one and then suddenly you have to crew up and bring in a bunch of people and then they work on it like crazy and they work on it, really religiously and then they go away to do other things. So that's
now
you have a racetrack outside your
that's what it sounds like. Well, here in New York City,
yeah.
Now that the streets are virtually deserted, including the highways, so these guys think this is just like a Le Mans or Grand Prix. So they do like 100 miles an hour. Yeah. So it does sound like it. How this is a funny thing though. I remember when I was watching Final Cut last night again for the third time. In the commentary section, they said that Ridley and neither Ridley nor David Peoples actually had read Lou Android's Dream of Electric Sheep rather. I mean, they actually read the novella at all. And a lot of the script was based upon another different. So Philip K. Dick Angle, which clearly he's credited for in film, is it what areas where you say it shines through? It's just specifically what it means to be human. What scenes where you say are more Philip K. Dick than something that Hampton may have dreamed up, or David Peoples?
It's funny. I wish the timing of our discussion here was different, because I just found in my garage, because I have a lot of free time now, I'm cleaning up my house. I found Hampton's original script that actually says "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" on it. This before anything else, and very few people I think have even seen the script. So I'd be curious to see Hampton's original first take on adapting the novella. But in terms of what actually made it to the screen, I mean, look, the technology, like the Void Conf, is huge. The characters, they're not exactly the same as they are in the book, but I mean, I don't know. I feel like, I have to tell you, my personal experience with reading the book was, I was a big fan of Harrison Ford with Raiders of the Lost Ark the year before, and I was a big fan of Ridley's with Alien, his previous film. And Omni Magazine had an article about this film that was in production called Blade Runner, and there was a picture of Ridley in front of one of the spinners, and it looked awesome. It was like this amazing future in this little frame in the magazine, and it said this is based on Philip K. Dick's book "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep." So I went out and I got the book before I even saw the movie, and I read the book. But on the cover of the book was the first Drew Struzan poster art. So automatically, as a kid, I'm visualizing Batty looking like Rutger Hauer, and I'm visualizing Pris looking like Daryl. So when I'm reading the book, it was almost already filling in, like the visuals were filling in from the movie from what little I'd seen. So it's kind of hard for me to separate the two. They're very kind of organically meshed in my memory. But things like Buster Friendly and Mercerism and some of these other things that are in the book that aren't in the movie, I think maybe kind of spiritually they might be there, even though they're not actually mentioned by name. I think just the tone of it. It's almost like what I like about Philip K. Dick's stories that I've read is like they have an incredible hook. They have a really great idea. There's something that really immediately gets you into it, but they're also kind of whimsical, and they're certainly dark and dystopian at times, but they're also kind of, I don't know, they're kind of like fun and sweet. It's a very well-rounded future usually when I read his stories. And Blade Runner the film went dark in ways that I don't think Do Androids Electric Sheep truly did. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but it's such a weird thing to compare and contrast the book and the movie, because they are like two sides of the same coin in many ways. But you can't. I mean, I don't go into the film and like nitpick or go down like the list like, oh, that's from the book, that's from the book. But I feel like the spirit of the book is there. Even though those aren't.
I have actually one question related to your documentary. Here is from Sergey, and it says there is relatively little information in Dangerous Days about Vangelis' soundtrack. Were there any issues in working with Vangelis?
Yeah, I tried to get Vangelis for a long time, and I spoke with his manager many, many times. His manager, Cherry Vanilla, is her name. Lovely lady. We had many great conversations about me going to Greece to shoot the interview with Vangelis' his own video crew, and these were discussions we were having for months.
Right.
Ultimately, he decided he didn't want to do an interview. So some people they don't feel comfortable sitting down and talking about their work, especially musicians and composers. Some are great at it, but some feel like it's a very private, personal process that they go through. So Vangelis was just one of those that just didn't feel like he could sit and articulate his process, because if you listen to the Blade Runner score, I mean, it feels very improvisational in many ways. It feels just straight from, he's just making it up, but it's coming from a really deep place inside of him. So I wish we had a whole 30 minutes just on Vangelis, but that was one of my biggest disappointments, was just not being able to get him. And believe me, we tried, and it just wasn't meant to be.
I guess some artists feel that exploring the very mechanism, meddling might actually disrupt the actual future production of anything. So they almost keep it very, very private, not share it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like he's not a composer that makes 3 or 5 or 10 movies a year. It's like when he makes when he was composing film scores, it was an event. It was like every maybe 2, 3, 5 years he would show up with a score, and obviously it's a very it's a deeply artistic process for him. He's not just churning out the scores, So I can imagine it would be perhaps difficult to talk about, or maybe like you say, it might make it less special if you talk about it.
Right. Now I have a question from this is someone who's seen the series Stargirl, which is something you worked on. It says, and this is the question: as a field producer for the series Stargirl, what unique style have you given the show, which makes it stand out from its original comic adaptation?
Field EPK producer is the job, and it's basically just working with having an EPK, which stands for electronic press kit. It's me and a camera operator and a sound recordist, and we're just capturing behind the scenes content. That's it. It's like there's nothing deeper than that. It's like we're happy to be there, and we're just recording behind the scenes content. That's it.
Oh, cool. So tell me a little bit about your directorial debut, Crave. Now that year was this is with Edward Furlong, Ron Perlman. Tell us a little bit about it. This is your first time behind helming a feature. Is that correct?
Yes, feature, and it was a long time coming. I've been wanting to make a feature since I was a kid, and it just took that long to get to it, and to find a project that I could get off the ground, that was not too expensive, that was that I felt I could do something special with, and it was interesting because I when I was working on Blade Runner Final Cut, I had become friends with Issa Dick Hackett, Philip K. Dick's daughter, and we became friends. And I mentioned to her late in the process, I said, I really want to get back into trying to direct something. Could I possibly direct a short film based on one of your dad's short stories? And she said yes. And here's 5 to choose from. And I found a 6th that was not part of that 5, and that 6th was I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon.
Right.
So I started working on that and working on it, and then her development executive at the time, Kaylin Egan, joined me to help me work on it because it was taking forever. It was becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So finally, it was Issa who said, and she read the script and she loved it and she thought it was great, but she said, this is going to really cost a lot of money. This is really big. Do you think maybe you should direct a smaller film first to prove that you can direct before we try to get this off the ground? So I did, and that's where Crave came about. And it was a really great learning experience. I learned a lot on it. I also had it was a huge headache. It was a terribly painful shoot, and yet I enjoyed every second of it because that's what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be making a film. So for all the complaining I might do about it, I do it with a sense of love and pride because I really did enjoy getting my ass kicked on that film.
So any in terms of this short story by Philip K. Dick, is there any talk about future work on that, or is that being put on hold like other films?
I mean, I think we're always trying to find a way to get it going, but in an industry that's already really difficult to get anything going, imagine it now. So I think the enthusiasm is still there, and I think we all really love the script and we love how it might be able to develop into something that will work. There's a lot of different ways to make movies now than when Kaylin and I wrote the script, which was that was like 10 years ago at this point. So the world is different, not just in terms of like the pandemic and how we're living as human beings, but filmmaking is different. I've been mentioning this a lot lately, but I was really blown away by this series on Disney Plus about the making of The Mandalorian, the gallery series. And in episode 4 of that series, they go into the technology and they go into the way they're shooting it on this volume stage with all of these high def, really, really ultra high resolution screens and ceilings and all that. And you can now basically create a really rich and realistic environment on a stage, but do it in a way that far, far exceeds the limitations of that stage. So you can create a vast horizon and a huge world and move around in that without ever really leaving this soundstage they're on. So that when you see things like that, you think, oh, maybe it is possible to do these epic stories, but on a much more reasonable budget. So these are all things that we consider whenever we talk about I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon or anything else. We think about, how can we get it going and how will we do it once we might, actually get the ball rolling. So, that's kind of it. That's kind of where it's at. There's still a lot of enthusiasm for it. It's just, who knows what direction it's ultimately going to go in.
And kind of, you remind me of Gladiator, which is one of the very first films that I introduced when it was a shot where you're actually showing the hundreds of thousands. That was all visual effects, right? Versus films from prior to that period.
Yeah, that's slightly different because that was added in post-production. This is actually basically live on the stage. So your camera is picking up, it's shooting everything, but all like the flaws that you might have as a camera operator, you're like, a little bump or whatever, or a reflection, or light just accidentally glints off your armor, or whatever it is you're shooting. Photographically, it is so much more realistic because it's all in camera. They might tweak things later, they might add things later, but on the whole, like the image that you see is there on the stage. And by the way, not only is that better for the effects of it, it's better for the actors because the actors can now interact in this world. They see it's not a big green screen anymore, and it's not somebody with a tennis ball and a stick and saying, "Here's the monster." It's basically it's there, and they see it, and they can now have a very visceral reaction to it. So all of these things are very encouraging, and not just from the storytelling point of view, but also, again, because of the world we're in right now, of having a safe set, a limited amount of people, keeping it, clean and hygienic and all of these things. It just seems like it's getting easier to make that a real, possibility.
Wow. Now let's talk about your short, Love Bite, which world premiere at Sidcus and at our festival. Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, it was actually one of the things I noticed, and one of our programmers is that, the bickering that between the two in that couple was really very entertaining. It pulls you in. It's a lot of bickering. Often, what I watch and in any kind of format, it's kind of like, okay, let's go to the next scene. Whereas this was part of it, and it kind of really pulled you into the whole the whole scene. So tell us a little bit about it and. Why made you choose to go with the horror genre?
Well, so the film stars Carly Baker and Kyle Carvin, and Carly is my wife.
Right.
And she had an idea. She had a dream, actually, one time, and she had this idea about a bickering couple during the zombie apocalypse. But she imagined it being a little more sweet and humorous and like an older couple. But she also she's done a lot of acting in the past, so she felt like if she's going to play this part, we obviously have to adjust it for her. So basically, I kind of took over the script that she wrote, the more playful older couple version, and I went much darker with it because I was just feeling so much frustration with the world at the time. We shot this just a little over a year ago, so at that time. I was dealing just with all like these things about like, the environment and politics and just how divisive people had become and just, everything was just so angry. And I felt like the world was spiraling out of control. And then we have a couple arguing about a deadly virus. It's like, we didn't know that was going to happen. We didn't know that like 4 months later, that would be a real thing. So anyway, we just thought, let's just go shoot this. Let's not make a big deal out of it. So many people talk for months and years and longer about like I'm going to do this film, and we thought, let's just do it. I mean, let's have fun. Let's just get back into the swing of it. Let's work on those filmmaking muscles and let's just shoot something. So we did, and so it was interesting because the bickering you're talking about, it really was much longer. There was tons more bickering, tons more political commentary, some very on the nose political commentary. And when we saw the first cut, we realized, okay, we have to, pick up the pace because people are going to tune out. And even though we love the dialogue and the performance and it's all fun and sarcastic, it wears you down. People arguing as it gets tiresome really fast. So we cut it down to just like the virtual minimal amount of information, and yet still keep it interesting for the characters. So we probably cut out, I mean, I'm going to say about maybe 10 minutes out of this. You know, the short all in is 17 minutes right now. So it was probably about a half an hour with all of this other stuff. But yeah, so we cut it down, and I've always loved the horror genre, and I don't even know if I'd call this horror, even though there are zombies and there's a little bit of blood in it, some gore, but it's a different type of horror. It's kind of it's about relationships, it's about personalities, it's about ego, it's about politics, it's about the world that we're in right now, and how if we don't stop and listen to each other, we're probably going to lose it. You know, we're going to lose the world we have because we're not listening to each other. We're not working together. So that was what the message of the short is, about these two people who are not working together, and how it goes bad, really, really bad throughout the course of the short. And it was, but again, I wanted to keep it a little bit fun and playful, but also get in a little bit of the edge that I tend to enjoy. And it was fun. I mean, we shot it over like 3 days, and we were racing to get to the premiere at Sitges, because that Carly and I met at Sitges in 2014. We were both jurors. We were on 2 different juries, but we met there. And then 8 months later, we started dating back in LA. And then we went back again in 2016 to be. She had a couple films there, and I think I was on a jury. I forget. I lose track. Sitges is one of the best festivals in the world, and you tend to do a lot of things where your memory does not lock in, because it's just fun. But then when we went back in 2016, that's when I got engaged to her, and so we did it out in Girona, out in the Catalonian countryside, and we got engaged at my godmother's estate, and then we said, okay, now that we're married, we have to come back to Sitges with our film that we made together. So we were racing to get to Sitges, and fortunately we just made it, although I had to make some fixes after the Sitges premiere. But yeah, so that's a long story on Love Bite.
And now, and currently the film still is in the festival circuit.
Yeah, it's you know, most festivals have either gone virtual, where they're like online streaming, or they're delaying until next year to see what happens. I honestly don't think we're going to see a responsible in-person screening for the rest of this year.
Right.
Next. So for right now, it's doing virtual screenings at the ones that have decided to go virtual. Like the next one is Fantas Poa in Brazil.
Okay.
They're doing a virtual festival. And then I can't say what it is yet, but we got a big festival today I was extremely happy about. So that's going to be what we're going to be doing for like a little while, and then I'll see if I can find a home online for it to stream.
Well, it's a great short. It's very, very entertaining, and it's true. It's not horror in the sense that it's dark, and there's an element of clearly that is non-horror. That is more interpersonal and relationships and so on.
It does get pretty dark in the end.
It does, and in a humorous way. Yeah. I got a question here from one of our viewers. Is did you ever sit down with Tangerine Dream during the final cut?
Well, I don't. The Tangerine Dream they worked on Legend with Ridley, not Blade Runner, so I'm not sure the connection there. But I love Tangerine Dream. I mean, I would love to talk to them, and they're the ones that are surviving. So, but yeah, I mean, there was never an instance to meet with them.
And another one is, have you thought about directing any episodes of The Mandalorian?
That would be amazing. Yeah, set me up with that. Make a call. I will love it. Yeah, no, I mean, I love The Mandalorian, and I'm excited about season 2. And it's a really interesting show because it is so perfectly simple, and that's not an insult. It's pure. It's such a pure,
right,
simple journey, like hero's journey, that I really, really enjoy it. And because sometimes the movies can get too complex or too complicated, and then you have to like start wondering, wait, if this happened, but it didn't, but in episode whatever that didn't happen, and you have to like step out of the movie and make a map of characters and events and things like that. Mandalorian is just clean. It's just very clean. He's just like a lone warrior on the out in the wastelands, and it's just like I love that about the show. But the shorter answer is yes, I would kill to do one, but I'm sure there's a line of about 10,000 other directors ahead of me.
And lastly, Charles, any future projects you're looking at right now that is in the embryonic stage that you're contemplating and looking,
Yeah, I've got 3 feature projects that are all different budget levels, because that's the trick, is finding the money, right?
Right.
So I can't just write a $100 million script because I'll never get it. So I have to keep trying to find ideas and stories that mean something to me, that I'm excited about, but that are also financially viable, that can be marketed and made into a film and sold and make a profit, hopefully, for the people that put up the money. And that's really tricky. So the lower you go with the budget, the easier it is to get going. But in a way, it's harder to write, because you have to make sure that you are keeping it really simple in terms of like locations and actors and all that. Crave really, kind of worked me over, because we had like a different location every day. We had a huge cast, relatively speaking. So now, with that sort of like painful wisdom behind me, I can now go in and write much more kind of like strategic scripts. But yeah, I've got like different genres and completely different stories, but they're also different budget levels. So it's like, when I get the opportunity to pitch something, and I pitch 2 or 3 ideas, I say, well, here's this one, this one. And I try to gauge where the enthusiasm is. And that's kind of when we start to have discussions about how to make it. And that's where I'm glad I have 3 different flavors of budgets, basically, to talk about.
I have one final question here that just came in. Is on Alien 3, was there any footage shot of the wooden planet the prison was going to be located on? Any model footage?
Yeah, no. We have plenty of artwork, conceptual art of the wooden planet on the Blu-ray and the DVD. By the way, if you're going to dive into the Alien movies, definitely get the Alien Anthology Blu-ray set, because there's much more content on the Blu-ray set. But in the documentary I did on Alien 3 called Wreckage and Rage, we have an entire chapter called Tales of the Wooden Planet. And in there's just tons of artwork. Basically, anything that we had at our disposal, thanks to the Fox archive, on Alien 3 and the subcategory of the wooden planet, we put on the disc. So yeah, I love the idea of the wooden planet. I mentioned years ago to someone at Fox that you guys should do like an animated version of the wooden planet story. Maybe not even the full script, just like a condensed version of it would be a lot of fun, just to see that world, because the idea that Vincent Ward had for that was just so out there, and I love it. There's no way in hell, I don't think anyone probably, when they heard that idea, felt like it was ever going to get made, but it's brilliant in terms of just like how completely nuts it is.
Any thoughts on this is on a parallel plane, but any thoughts on the new film Dune coming up? Or a lot of our PKD people really seem to also like Herbert's book.
Let me show you something I also found in my garage. I didn't know you were going to ask me about Dune, but so I'm going through my garage and I'm finding old things from like when I was in high school, like in the 80s, and I found this Dune book cover signed by Frank Herbert.
Oh wow!
So yeah, I found that the other day in my garage, and it's like, wow, yeah. I love Dune. I love David Lynch's Dune. It's flawed though it is, and I think it's actually you could do a final cut of his version of Dune. If you have to put in a lot of resources, which I don't know if any studio would want to do right now. But now is the perfect time, because you've got Villeneuve's Dune coming up, so
right.
You could piggyback onto that. Yeah, I mean, look, we'll see. I think Denis Villeneuve is an amazing director. And I'm curious to see what he does with it. I will just say, based on the images so far, I think I tend to still lean towards Lynch's Dune, just because the design work in that film is just, it's mind blowing. It is like a truly completely different universe versus what I think you've seen still so far from the new movie, which looks a little more grounded and real, and perhaps maybe it'll be better because you might connect to the characters more immediately. Right. It feels real and tactile and something that we would see here on Earth. But Lynch's Dune, I mean, it's almost like a rock opera. It's just so crazy, like way out there. And I really do appreciate that. And I think the cast in that film is phenomenal as well. So a big fan of Dune, and I'm definitely looking forward to the new film. But it'll be a tall order to top my love of the Lynch film.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our episode, Charles. It's been great. I hope we see you directing Philip K. Dick's Hope Shall Arrive Soon.
Well, there's a long way to go before that's the reality, and I think things have changed over the time since you read that old Wikipedia entry. But thank you. I mean, I hope it happens one day. It's a really great story, and what we've done with it, I think, is really great.
And for those who want to stay in touch, I have here, I guess the best way is hashtag, right? Lauzirika. And how do you pronounce it? I want to make sure that this is the correct pronunciation.
I don't think that's how you do it exactly, but it's Lauzirika is the Americanized way of saying it. It's just at Lauzirika. Go to Twitter and just do at Lauzirika.
Okay, great.
You don't need the hashtag.
All right, excellent. Well,
thank you for
Charles. Thanks a lot for everything. It's been fantastic. Maybe we reconnoiter 6 months or a year down the line, see what part 2 on this. I'm sure a lot of people have more questions. Hopefully, there'll be no pandemic at that time. We'll be actually go out and working. But in the meantime, there'll be some new jewels in that garage of yours. It seems like all this great stuff is out there.
That's been the one good thing about the pandemic is cleaning up my house, is finding stuff.
And great stuff. All right, Charles. Look, thanks a lot for your time. We'll be posting this on our YouTube. It's actually going automatically, and our Facebook. I'll send you a link, and keep us posted on any news. Good luck on your short, on future festival screenings, and we'll be there to support you any way we can.
I really appreciate it, and I thank you for having me.
Thank you. You have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So this brings us to the conclusion of our segment with Charles Lauzirika. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This way we can continue to bring you more guests, whether filmmakers or scientists or writers, all associated with the Philip K. Dick universe. So without any further ado, have a good day, stay well, stay healthy, and I will speak with you real soon. Bye-bye.